Have you ever heard of a ruler who was both feared and admired? Meet Eric Bloodaxe, a Viking king whose reign in the 10th century was marked by violence and controversy. But what if I told you that his rule was wrong for reasons you never expected? Prepare to uncover the surprising truths behind his rule and its impact on Viking society. Eric Bloodaxe's journey to power was anything but ordinary. He rose during a time of chaos in Norway, where many sought control amidst the turmoil. Being the son of Harald Fairhair, the first king of Norway, Eric was expected to take on a leadership role. However, his path to the throne was steeped in ruthless ambition and violence. Eric did not just inherit power, he fought tooth and nail for it, and the cost of his ambition was staggering. Many viewed Eric's rise as a reflection of the harsh realities of Viking life. Rather than being a benevolent leader, Eric's reign was defined by a constant struggle for power. The Vikings, known for their warrior culture, often faced immense challenges, including rival clans and external threats. Eric's leadership was less about ruling and more about surviving, and Eric's methods exemplified this brutal truth. His story invites us to question the very nature of leadership. Is it merely the exercise of power, or is it about earning the respect of those you lead? The glamorization of Viking kingship often overlooks the realities of their rule. Viking kings had to navigate a landscape filled with rivalries and threats, and many resorted to fear to maintain control. Eric Bloodaxe was no exception. While some may romanticize the idea of a strong leader, the truth is that the role of a king was often fraught with danger and violence. Eric's rule is a case study in how power can corrupt and destroy, leading us to reflect on how this contrasts with our modern views of leadership. Eric Bloodaxe became notorious for his brutal tactics, using violence as a tool to eliminate rivals and enforce his rule. He relied on mercenaries and fierce warriors, perpetuating a cycle of retaliation among clans. While fear can be an effective method for maintaining control, it also breeds unrest among the people. This raises important questions about the effectiveness of fear as a leadership strategy. Is ruling through intimidation a sign of strength, or does it ultimately reveal weakness? The impact of Eric's rule on Viking society was profound. His reign was marked by social and economic turmoil, driven by the constant state of warfare. Trade and agriculture suffered as communities were torn apart by violence. Many families lived in fear, unable to escape the repercussions of Eric's brutal policy. This instability weakened the Viking culture and identity, prompting us to consider whether a more peaceful approach could have led to a stronger society. Religion and superstition played significant roles in the lives of Vikings, influencing Eric's decisions as a leader. The Vikings were deeply religious and often believed in fate and prophecy. Eric's actions were frequently guided by superstitions, leading him to believe that violent acts would earn him favor from the gods. This reliance on fate ultimately contributed to his downfall. Understanding how beliefs shape the actions of leaders can provide valuable insights into the complexities of historical narratives. When comparing Eric Bloodaxe to other Viking leaders, it's clear that his approach was distinctly different. While many Viking leaders sought alliances and cooperation, Eric often chose conflict. Leaders like Harald Hardrada focused on building a unified kingdom, while Eric's tactics led to isolation and distrust among allies. This contrast in leadership styles reveals differing values within Viking culture and raises important questions about what it means to be a leader. Women played crucial roles during Eric's rule, often influencing the political landscape. In Viking society, women held significant power and could affect decisions behind the scenes. Eric's wives and daughters often took on critical roles, yet their contributions are frequently overlooked in historical narratives. This invites us to reflect on the gender dynamics of leadership and how the voices of women can shape history. The legacy of Eric Bloodaxe is a complex one, blending fear and admiration. His reign has been romanticized in sagas and stories, overshadowing the reality of his brutal methods. The impact of his rule set a dangerous precedent for violence in Viking politics, which continues to influence modern perceptions of Viking history. Understanding how to differentiate between legend and reality can help us better appreciate the complexities of history. Eric Bloodaxe's downfall was a direct consequence of his tyrannical rule. Constant rebellion from his own people and violent methods alienated potential allies, ultimately leading to his expulsion from Norway. His tragic end highlights the inherent dangers of tyranny and the fleeting nature of power. Modern leaders can draw important lessons from Eric's story, reminding us that power must be wielded responsibly. To fully grasp the significance of Eric Bloodaxe's reign, it's crucial to understand the historical context of Viking society. Viking life was highly stratified and centered around concepts of honor and loyalty. Eric's violent approach undermined these core values, creating divisions within the very society he ruled. This understanding sheds light on the failures of his leadership and emphasizes the importance of social cohesion. The stories of Eric's victims deserve attention too. Many innocent lives were lost due to his brutal policies, yet their stories are often eclipsed by his own legend. These narratives offer a more complete picture of Eric's reign, highlighting the personal toll of his violent tactics. Giving a voice to those who suffered can enrich our understanding of history and emphasize the human cost of power struggles. Eric Bloodaxe's influence extends into popular culture today. His character appears in films, books, and TV shows, often exaggerated or romanticized. These portrayals can affect how we perceive Viking history and leadership, leadership, leading us to critique modern narratives and understand their implications. It is important to explore how historical representation in media shapes our collective memory. When we compare Eric Bloodaxe to other historical figures, we can see common patterns in the use of fear to maintain power. Figures like Caligula and Ivan the Terrible relied on brutality, often leading to their own demise. Understanding these patterns reveals valuable lessons about human behavior and leadership, prompting us to reflect on the consequences of tyranny throughout history. The interpretation of Eric Bloodaxe's legacy has evolved over time. Historians frequently reinterpret events based on new evidence and shifting perspectives. This ongoing process highlights the importance of critical thinking in historical analysis. By engaging with these debates, we can enhance our understanding of the past and apply these lessons to contemporary discussions. The Viking Age was a time of exploration, trade, and violence, and Eric Bloodaxe's story is just one part of a much larger narrative. Understanding the complexities of this era allows us to foster a more nuanced view of history. As we explore the richness of Viking culture, we gain insights into the broader human experience. In reflecting on Eric's reign, we can identify valuable lessons about leadership and ethics. Eric's story teaches us about the dangers of tyranny and the need for responsible governance. Recognizing these insights can inform our actions today and help shape the leaders of tomorrow. Finally, Eric Bloodaxe's story resonates in contemporary discussions about leadership. His reign raises important questions about accountability and the ethical responsibilities of those in power. Engaging with these conversations enables us to critically analyze authority and strive for ethical leadership in our own lives. As we delve deeper into Viking culture, we discover that there is much more to learn beyond Eric Bloodaxe. Viking society was rich and complex, encompassing art, trade, and exploration. Their values extended beyond warfare and brutality, enriching our understanding of what it meant to be a Viking. Gaining insights from the broader picture helps us appreciate the nuances of history. By examining why Eric Bloodaxe's rule was wrong, you've learned that his leadership was marked by fear, violence, and missed opportunities for a more united society. Now, you can take these lessons to heart as you reflect on modern leadership and the importance of ethics and responsibility. History isn't just a series of events, it's a treasure trove of wisdom for building a better future. Have you ever wondered if being a Viking king was as glamorous as it sounds? In reality, Viking kings faced immense challenges that went far beyond the stereotypes of bravery and conquest. They navigated a world filled with rival clans and external threats, where power was often maintained through fear rather than respect. The role of a king during this time was less about ruling with dignity and more about surviving the brutal realities of leadership. Eric Bloodaxe's reign exemplifies these harsh truths. His rule was marked by a constant struggle for power and control. Unlike the romanticized vision of kingship that we might envision today, Eric's life as a king was riddled with conflicts. He had to make decisions that would solidify his power, often at the expense of those he ruled. This stark contrast between the idealized king and the reality of Viking leadership invites us to rethink what it means to lead effectively. Imagine a leader who wields fear like a weapon, believing it to be the key to control. Eric Bloodaxe relied heavily on intimidation to maintain his authority. This strategy might seem effective in the short term, but it often led to resentment and unrest among his subjects. By examining Eric's methods, we can question the long-term effectiveness of fear as a leadership tool. Is it truly wise to lead by instilling terror in those you govern, or does it create a ticking time bomb of dissent? In Eric's time, the consequences of such leadership were dire. The Viking society was already on shaky ground, and his brutal tactics only exacerbated the instability. Wars and conflicts disrupted trade and agriculture, leading to widespread social and economic turmoil. Families were torn apart by violence, and the very fabric of Viking culture began to fray under the strain of Eric's rule. This raises an important question. Could a more peaceful approach have created a stronger and more resilient society? Religious beliefs and superstitions played a crucial role in shaping Eric's decisions. The Vikings were deeply spiritual, often interpreting fate and omens as guiding forces in their lives. Eric's belief that violent acts could earn him favor from the gods was misguided, contributing significantly to his eventual downfall. How do personal beliefs and convictions influence the actions of leaders, especially when those beliefs are rooted in violence and destruction? When comparing Eric Bloodaxe to other Viking leaders of his time, a clear pattern emerges. While many sought alliances and cooperation, Eric chose a path of conflict and aggression. His contemporaries, such as Harald Hardrada, focused on building a unified kingdom that fostered stability and growth. Eric's choices ultimately led to isolation and distrust, showcasing the stark contrast in leadership styles within Viking culture. This comparison provides valuable insights into what defines effective leadership. Women played significant roles in Viking society, often influencing political decisions and leadership dynamics. Contrary to popular belief, women held substantial power during this era. Eric's wives and daughters were not merely passive figures. They actively contributed to political affairs. Their stories are often overlooked in historical accounts, prompting us to consider the essential roles women played in shaping Viking governance. Understanding these dynamics helps to paint a more comprehensive picture of leadership in Viking times. As we reflect on Eric Bloodaxe's legacy, it becomes clear that his reign left left a complicated mark on history. The blend of fear and admiration surrounding his name creates a dual legacy that complicates our understanding of the Vikings. While Eric's story is often romanticized in sagas, his brutal methods set a precedent for violence that affected subsequent generations of Viking leaders. How do we navigate the fine line between legend and reality when discussing figures like Eric Bloodaxe? Ultimately, the downfall of Eric Bloodaxe was a direct consequence of his tyrannical rule. Facing constant rebellion from his own people, his violent methods alienated potential allies. Eric's expulsion from Norway and eventual death in battle serve as sobering reminders of the dangers inherent in a reign defined by brutality. Modern leaders can draw critical lessons from Eric's tragic story about the fleeting nature of power and the importance of leading with integrity. To fully grasp Eric Bloodaxe's impact, we must consider the broader historical context of Viking society. Their world was characterized by honor, loyalty, and bravery among warriors. Eric's violent approach undermined these core values, resulting in division and distrust. Understanding how these societal values shaped Eric's failures provides essential insights into the leadership challenges of his times. The stories of Eric's victims are equally significant in understanding his reign. Many innocent lives were lost due to his ruthless policies, yet these narratives are often overshadowed by the king's legend. By exploring the experiences of those affected by Eric's actions, we gain a fuller understanding of the human cost of his leadership. How can we amplify the voices of those who suffered under tyrannical rulers and ensure that their stories are told? Eric Bloodaxe's influence extends beyond history and into popular culture today. He appears in various films, books, and TV shows, often portrayed in exaggerated or romanticized ways. These representations shape our understanding of Viking history and leadership, prompting us to critique modern narratives about the past. By exploring the implications of historical representation in media, we can better understand how these portrayals influence public perception. When comparing Eric Bloodaxe to other notorious figures in history, we find striking similarities. Leaders like Caligula and Ivan the Terrible also used fear to maintain power, often resulting in their own downfall. Understanding the patterns that emerge from these comparisons reveals important lessons about human behavior and leadership dynamics. How can examining these historical figures inform our approach to leadership today? As our understanding of Eric Bloodaxe evolves over time, we must recognize the role of historical revisionism. Historians reinterpret events based on new evidence, and the narratives surrounding Eric have shifted as perspectives change. This process highlights the importance of critical thinking and historical analysis. How can we apply these lessons to modern discussions about history and its interpretation? The Viking Age was a time of complexity, marked by exploration, trade, and violence. Eric Bloodaxe's story represents only one facet of this rich history. By delving into the broader Viking narrative, we can foster a more nuanced understanding of the era. How can we encourage a deeper appreciation for history? By examining the myriad stories that compose it. In reflecting on Eric's reign, we uncover valuable lessons about leadership and ethics. His rule teaches us about the dangers of violence and the necessity for responsible governance. By recognizing these insights, we can apply them to our own lives and the leadership roles we encounter. Lastly, Eric Bloodaxe's story resonates in contemporary discussions about leadership and ethics. His reign is often cited in debates surrounding power dynamics and accountability. Engaging with these discussions helps us critically analyze authority and strive for ethical leadership in our own context. How can we ensure that our leaders are held accountable and that history informs our understanding of ethical governance? By examining the complexities of Viking culture, we find that there is much more to learn beyond the figure of Eric Bloodaxe. Viking society was rich and multifaceted, encompassing art, trade, and exploration. Their values extended far beyond warfare and brutality, offering insights into the broader human experience. What lessons can you gain from exploring this multifaceted history? Have you ever wondered if being a Viking king was as glamorous as it sounds? Viking kingship is often romanticized, but the reality is far more complex. These leaders faced immense challenges, including rival clans and external threats. Instead of ruling with dignity, many Viking kings, including Eric Bloodaxe, relied heavily on fear to maintain control over their subjects. This strategy not only highlights the harsh realities of leadership, but also raises questions about the effectiveness of fear as a governing tool. Eric Bloodaxe rose to power during a tumultuous time in Norway. He was not just any king, he was the son of Harald Fairhair, the first king of Norway. Eric's path to the throne was anything but gentle. Many viewed his rise as ruthless and violent, filled with a constant struggle for power. As we explore Eric's reign, we will uncover the lessons about leadership that can be learned from his journey. Being a Viking king was less about ruling with compassion and more about surviving in a brutal world. Imagine having to defend your throne against those who would seek to take it from you at any moment. The role of a king was fraught with peril, where making the wrong decision could mean the end of your reign. This stark contrast between our modern perceptions of kingship and the reality faced by Viking rulers begs the question: how do our views of leadership differ from those of the past? Eric Bloodaxe was notorious for his brutal tactics. He used violence as a primary tool to eliminate rivals and maintain his rule. Unlike leaders who sought alliances and cooperation, Eric often resorted to mercenaries and ruthless warriors. His actions led to a cycle of retaliation among clans, creating an environment filled with fear and unrest. As we delve deeper into Eric's tactics, we must consider, what does this say about the effectiveness of fear in leadership? The consequences of Eric's brutal methods were felt throughout Viking society. His reign was characterized by social and economic turmoil. The constant warfare disrupted trade and agriculture, leading to a weakened Viking culture and identity. Families were torn apart by the violence, raising an important question. Could a more peaceful approach have created a stronger, more united society? Religion and superstition played significant roles in Eric's decision-making. The Vikings were deeply religious, believing in fate and prophecies that guided their lives. Eric's actions were often driven by these beliefs, leading him to think that violent acts would earn him favor from the gods. This misguided reliance on fate contributed to his downfall, prompting us to explore how belief systems can shape the actions of leaders. When we compare Eric Bloodaxe to other Viking leaders, the contrast becomes even more evident. While many sought alliances and stability, Eric chose a path of conflict. Leaders like Harald Hardrada focused on unifying their kingdoms, showcasing a very different approach to leadership. By examining these contrasting styles, we can glean valuable insights into Viking culture and what defined effective leadership. Women also played a significant role during Eric's rule, often influencing political decisions behind the scenes. In Viking society, women held power and were crucial in shaping events, yet their contributions are frequently overlooked in historical narratives. This raises important questions about gender dynamics in leadership. How can we better recognize and understand the roles women played in shaping Viking governance? Eric Bloodaxe's legacy is one of fear and controversy. While he is sometimes romanticized in sagas, his brutal reign set a dangerous precedent for violence in Viking politics. This legacy continues to affect how we perceive Viking history today. How do we differentiate between the legend and the reality of figures like Eric Bloodaxe? As we discuss Eric's downfall, it is essential to recognize the consequences of his tyrannical rule. Constant rebellion from his people and alienation of potential allies led to his eventual expulsion from Norway. The end of Eric's reign serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of tyrannical leadership. What lessons can modern leaders draw from his tragic story? To understand Eric Bloodaxe's impact, we must consider the historical context of Viking society. It was a culture steeped in honor, loyalty, and bravery. Eric's violent methods undermined these core values, causing division and distrust among warriors. As we analyze this context, we can gain insight into the societal values that shaped his leadership failures. The stories of Eric's victims are crucial to understanding his reign. Many innocent lives were lost due to his policies, yet these narratives are often overshadowed by his legend. By exploring the experiences of those affected by Eric's actions, we gain a fuller understanding of the human cost of his leadership. How can we amplify the voices of the suffering and ensure their stories are remembered? Eric Bloodaxe's influence reaches into modern culture, appearing in films, books, and television shows. However, these portrayals often exaggerate or romanticize his character, affecting public perceptions of Viking history. Understanding how Eric is represented in modern narratives allows us to critique historical representation and its implications for how we view the past. When we compare Eric Bloodaxe to other tyrants in history, striking similarities emerge. Figures like Caligula and Ivan the Terrible also relied on fear to maintain power, often leading to their own demise. By examining these leaders, we can identify patterns in human behavior and reflect on what their stories reveal about effective leadership. As our understanding of Eric Bloodaxe evolves, we must also recognize the role of historical revisionism. Historians continuously reinterpret events based on new evidence, shifting the narratives around Eric as perspectives change. This evolution highlights the importance of critical thinking in historical analysis. How can we apply these lessons to modern discussions about history? The Viking Age itself was a complex era, filled with exploration, trade, and violence. Eric Bloodaxe's story is just one piece of this larger puzzle. By delving into the intricacies of the Viking Age, we can foster a more nuanced understanding of history. How can we encourage deeper appreciation for history? By examining the myriad stories that compose it. Reflecting on Eric's reign offers valuable lessons about leadership and ethics. His rule teaches us about the dangers of violence and tyranny, while emphasizing that leadership requires responsibility beyond mere power. As we contemplate these insights, we can consider how they apply to our own lives and the leadership roles we encounter. Eric Bloodaxe's story also resonates in contemporary discussions about leadership ethics. His reign often serves as a reference point in debates about power dynamics and accountability. Engaging with these discussions helps us critically analyze authority and strive for ethical leadership in our own contexts. How can we ensure that our leaders are held accountable and that we learn from the mistakes of the past? Finally, understanding Viking culture goes beyond Eric Bloodaxe alone. Their society was rich and complex, characterized by art, trade, and exploration. Exploring the broader aspects of Viking culture can transform our perception of these remarkable people. Valuable insights can we gain from this deeper exploration of Viking history? Have you ever thought about how the actions of a single ruler can ripple through history? Eric Bloodaxe's reign was a testament to the complexities of Viking leadership. While he is often remembered as a fierce warrior king, the reality of his rule was far more chaotic and destructive than many might assume. Most people picture Viking kings as noble figures riding into battle, but the truth is far more unsettling. Eric's reign brought profound social and economic turmoil to Viking society. Picture this: a land constantly ravaged by warfare, where trade routes are disrupted and the livelihoods of ordinary people are shattered. This state of perpetual conflict didn't just affect the warriors, it trickled down to families and communities, leaving a legacy of fear and instability. As we explore the impact of Eric's rule, we must ask ourselves, could a more peaceful approach have forged a stronger Viking society? During Eric's reign, trade became a victim of his violent ambitions. A constant fighting made it nearly impossible for merchants to safely transport goods. Imagine being a trader who couldn't guarantee safe passage for your wares. This was the reality for many during Eric's time. Now, the disruption of trade affected not just the economy but also the culture, as the Vikings were known for their exploration and commerce. In addition to economic repercussions, many families were torn apart by violence and fear. Imagine children losing their parents to conflict or communities being displaced due to Eric's ruthless campaigns. This kind of social fragmentation weakened the very foundation of Viking culture. The fear instilled in the people led to a society where trust eroded and neighbors turned against one another. As we analyze these effects, we must consider, how can a society recover from such deep-seated fear and division? One of the most striking aspects of Eric's rule was how it fundamentally altered the identity of the Vikings. The culture, once celebrated for its valor and exploration, became overshadowed by bloodshed and terror. This transformation raises an essential question: how do leaders shape the identity of their people through their actions? Eric's reliance on brutal tactics not only harmed his own people, but also set a dangerous precedent for future Viking leaders. The legacy of violence created an environment where fear was the primary means of control. This model of leadership might seem effective in the short term, but it ultimately led to rebellion and resistance. How does this cycle of violence play out in other historical contexts, and what lessons can we learn from it? As we dig deeper into Eric's reign, we will examine the role of external threats and rival clans. Eric was not only fighting against other leaders, he was also battling the forces of nature and fate. Viking society was marked by constant challenges, both from within and outside their borders. How did these factors influence Eric's decisions and, ultimately, his downfall? To further understand the impact of Eric's rule, we must also explore the role of religion and superstition. The Vikings were deeply religious, and their beliefs heavily influenced their actions. Eric's decisions were often guided by omens and prophecies, leading him to believe that violence could earn him favor from the gods. This misguided reliance on fate raises an intriguing question: how can belief systems dictate the choices of powerful leaders? While Eric's rule was characterized by violence, it is essential to note that other Viking leaders took different paths. By examining figures like Harald Hardrada, we can see how contrasting leadership styles reveal deeper values in Viking culture. Some leaders sought alliances and peace, while Eric's approach was to foster division. What can we learn from these comparisons about the nature of leadership? The legacy of Eric Bloodaxe is a complex tapestry woven from threads of fear, violence, and occasional admiration. While some narratives romanticize his character, they often overlook the human cost of his actions. Many innocent lives were lost due to his brutal policies, and the stories of his victims are crucial. How can we ensure that these narratives are heard and remembered? In modern times, Eric Bloodaxe's influence extends beyond history books and into popular culture. His character appears in films, books, and TV shows, often exaggerated for dramatic effect. While this portrayal can capture the imagination, it also distorts our understanding of Viking history. How do these representations shape our views of the past, and what implications does that have for our understanding of leadership today? When we reflect on Eric Bloodaxe's rule, it is essential to consider the lessons we can draw from his reign. Our leadership requires responsibility, not just power. The dangers of violence and tyranny remind us that effective leadership must also embrace ethics and compassion. How can these insights inform our actions in our own lives? Eric's story resonates in contemporary discussions about leadership and ethics. His reign serves as a cautionary tale in debates about accountability and authority. Engaging with these discussions can help us critically analyze our own leaders and their actions. What steps can we take to ensure ethical leadership in today's world? Understanding Viking culture goes beyond Eric Bloodaxe. Their society was rich and complex, encompassing art, trade, and exploration. By exploring these broader aspects, we can appreciate the full spectrum of Viking life. How can a deeper understanding of Viking culture change our perception of these fascinating people? In closing, the impact of Eric Bloodaxe's rule on Viking society provides essential lessons about leadership, power, and ethics. The fear and violence that marked his reign offer a stark contrast to the potential for unity and strength through peaceful governance. History is not just a collection of past events, it is a treasure trove of wisdom for navigating our future. Let us carry these lessons forward as we strive for a better understanding of leadership in our lives and communities. Have you ever wondered how deeply held beliefs can influence a leader's decisions, sometimes with devastating consequences? In the world of the Vikings, religion and superstition played a significant role in shaping their actions. actions and choices. Eric Bloodaxe, the notorious Viking king, is a perfect case study in how belief systems can impact leadership. While most people think of kings as powerful rulers who make decisions based solely on logic and strategy, the reality is often much more complicated. Vikings were deeply religious, believing that their fate was intertwined with the will of the gods. This belief in a predetermined destiny created a culture where actions were often guided by superstitions and omens. Eric was no exception. He sought to gain favor with the gods through violent acts, convinced that bloodshed could elevate his standing in the eyes of those he worshipped. Reliance on religious beliefs can lead us to ask, how did these spiritual convictions influence the fate of Eric Bloodaxe? One strange fact that many don't know is that the Vikings had a very pragmatic approach to their religious beliefs. They didn't adhere to a single dogma, but were open to adapting different gods and practices, which is why Viking society could be both brutal and deeply spiritual. This contradiction presents a fascinating dilemma. How could a society so focused on violence also hold such reverence for the divine? Eric's violent methods were often justified by his belief that he was fulfilling a divine destiny. He thought that as long as he was fighting for his place in the eyes of the gods, his actions were warranted. This perspective offers a controversial view of leadership. What happens when a leader believes they are acting in accordance with divine will, regardless of the moral implications? It suggests that when leaders rely heavily on their interpretations of fate or divine approval, they may overlook the impact of their actions on the very people they govern. Moreover, Eric's faith in omens and prophecies influenced his decision-making processes, leading him to make rash choices based on superstitions rather than sound judgment. For example, he might have interpreted a bad omen as a sign to escalate conflicts rather than seek peaceful resolutions. This raises an important question. How can beliefs that should guide leaders instead lead them down a path of destruction? As we delve deeper into Eric's reliance on religious and superstitious beliefs, we find that this misguided faith contributed significantly to his downfall. His belief in fate did not protect him from the consequences of his violent actions. Instead, it alienated potential allies and fueled a cycle of vengeance that ultimately destabilized his reign. How often do leaders today allow their beliefs to cloud their judgment and lead them to make similarly destructive decisions? A Viking perspective on fate also reveals something critical about human nature. The desire to interpret signs from the universe can sometimes overshadow rational thought. This conflict between faith and logic is not unique to the Vikings. It resonates throughout history and can be observed in many modern leaders. In contrast to Eric's violent pursuits, other Viking leaders demonstrated a more nuanced understanding of their beliefs. For instance, leaders who sought alliances rather than relying on brute force were able to create more stable societies. They understood that maintaining good relationships with neighboring clans and tribes was essential for survival. This contrasting approach to leadership raises a vital point. What can we learn from those who chose collaboration over conflict? As we analyze Eric Bloodaxe's reliance on religion and superstition, it is essential to remember the broader implications of how belief systems shape actions. How can we ensure that our values and beliefs inform our leadership in positive ways? How do we avoid repeating the mistakes of leaders who have been led astray by their faith? Furthermore, the way Eric's legacy has been portrayed in modern culture often romanticizes his brutality while glossing over the underlying belief systems that drove his actions. In literature and film, he might be depicted as a fearsome warrior, but the complex interplay of faith and power that defined his reign often goes unexamined. How do these portrayals influence our understanding of historical figures and the lessons we can draw from their lives? In closing this exploration of Eric Bloodaxe and the role of religion and superstition in his leadership, we find a poignant reminder of the power beliefs can hold over our actions. While faith can inspire greatness, it can also lead to chaos and destruction when intertwined with violence and tyranny. The story of Eric invites us to reflect on the nature of leadership, urging us to consider how our beliefs inform our choices. Can we ensure that our convictions lead us toward unity and strength rather than division and fear? As we move forward, let us take these lessons to heart, striving to create a future where belief serves as a guide rather than a weapon. In the fierce and often ruthless world of the Vikings, leadership took on many forms, each with its own style, strategies, and outcomes. Eric Bloodaxe's reign, however, stands out as a stark contrast to his contemporaries. While other Viking leaders sought alliances and unity, Eric chose a path riddled with conflict and confrontation. This raises a compelling question. How did Eric's choices diverge so sharply from those of other notable Viking figures, and what can we learn from this comparison? One interesting aspect of Viking leadership is how various leaders navigated the complexities of power during a tumultuous period. Most people believe that all Viking leaders were inherently brutal and warlike, but the reality is much more nuanced. Many sought to build strong alliances and foster cooperation among clans. Eric Bloodaxe, on the other hand, often opted for violence and intimidation, relying on mercenaries and fierce warriors to cement his rule. His approach highlights a critical insight. Leadership styles can significantly impact the success and stability of a society. To truly understand the ramifications of Eric's leadership, let's take a closer look at two of his contemporaries, Harald Hardrada and Sweyn Forbeard. Harald Hardrada, often celebrated for for his military prowess, sought to unify and consolidate his power through strategic marriages and alliances. His approach was collaborative rather than combative. He understood that Viking society valued loyalty and kinship, and he leveraged those principles to create a strong and unified kingdom. In contrast, Eric's reliance on conflict led to a fractured political landscape. What does this contrast tell us about the values embedded in Viking culture? While loyalty and bravery were essential, Eric's method of leadership fostered isolation and distrust among potential allies. Many would argue that his violent tactics alienated those who could have been his allies. This ultimately weakened his position, making him vulnerable to attacks from rival factions. If Eric had embraced the collaborative tactics employed by leaders like Harald Hardrada, might his reign have flourished instead of faltering? Moreover, Eric's decision-making often revealed an obsession with maintaining power at all costs. He believed that fear was an effective tool to rule, but this reliance on intimidation bred resentment and unrest among the very people he sought to control. Contrast, leaders like Sweyn Forbeard cultivated a reputation of respect and mutual benefit. Their ability to foster loyalty through shared interests led to more robust governance and a lasting legacy. But here's the twist. Despite the apparent differences in approach, both Eric and his contemporaries operated within the same cultural framework. Viking society placed a high value on honor, bravery, and the warrior ethos. However, Eric's choices diverged significantly, raising questions about the consequences of prioritizing power over partnership. His story serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that the effectiveness of a leader can often hinge on their willingness to collaborate rather than dominate. Interestingly, one lesser-known fact about Viking society is that leaders were not merely warriors, but also skilled negotiators. They understood the importance of diplomacy, often engaging in trade and establishing alliances to enhance their power. This aspect of Viking leadership contrasts sharply with Eric's approach, emphasizing that while some leaders thrived on conflict, others recognized that cooperation could lead to greater long-term benefits. As we explore Eric Bloodaxe's leadership in comparison to his peers, we are left with significant insights into the nature of power and the complexities of leadership. The question lingers: how can we apply these lessons to our understanding of modern leadership? Leadership in today's world requires a delicate balance of strength and empathy. Eric's reign teaches us that relying solely on fear and brutality can undermine the very foundations of leadership. As we consider the contrasting approaches of Viking leaders, we should reflect on the importance of fostering collaboration and building relationships that enhance collective. Eric Bloodaxe's reign serves as a compelling case study in the varying leadership styles of Viking society. While he embodied the fierce warrior ethos, his inability to cultivate alliances ultimately led to his downfall. By examining the choices made by Eric and comparing them with his contemporaries, we gain valuable insights into the broader implications of leadership. The lessons drawn from this exploration remind us that true leadership transcends brute force, emphasizing the power of collaboration, trust, and unity in achieving lasting success. The Viking Age was not just an era of plunder and pillaging. It was a complex society that included a myriad of perspectives, particularly regarding the roles women played within it. Contrary to the common perception that Viking culture was dominated solely by male warriors, women in this society wielded considerable influence and power. They were not merely passive figures. They actively contributed to the political and social fabric of their communities. But how did this unfold during the tumultuous reign of Eric Bloodaxe? You might think that Eric Bloodaxe, notorious for his brutality, would have sidelined women in the political arena. However, the truth is far more nuanced. Women, especially those in Eric's family, were integral to the power dynamics of Viking society. Many historians highlight the fact that Viking women had rights that were largely absent in many contemporary societies. They could own property, initiate divorce, and even lead households in the absence of their husbands. This leads us to an interesting question. What roles did women actually play during Eric's rule, and how did they influence the political landscape? Eric's wives and daughters were not just bystanders in a world dominated by men. They were often pivotal in political negotiations and decisions. Eric's first wife, for example, could have been instrumental in securing alliances with powerful clans, leveraging her status to create support for her husband. Unlike other cultures where women's voices were almost entirely muted, Viking women had a significant say in familial and clan matters. This raises an intriguing point. Can we regard these women as co-rulers in their own right, even if history often overlooks their contributions? And to a rare yet compelling insight, Viking women, particularly those of high status, sometimes led raids themselves, demonstrating both leadership and valor. There are historical accounts of women fighting alongside their male counterparts, challenging the stereotype of Viking warriors. Imagine the surprise of their enemies when they encountered fierce women on the battlefield. This aspect of Viking culture not only highlights women's strength, but also emphasizes their role in shaping the identity of their society. As we look at Eric's reign, we must consider how these powerful women impacted his leadership. Eric Bloodaxe's brutal rule may have caused resentment among his subjects, but the women in his life often played the role of mediators. They were the ones who maintained social ties, often smoothing over conflicts and helping to build alliances. Ironically, while Eric sought to dominate through fear and violence, the women around him wielded influence that stemmed from respect and loyalty. However, there's a controversial aspect to this discussion. Some historians argue that the romanticized version of Viking women as warriors and leaders can overshadow the real struggles they faced. Now, they did have more rights than women in many other societies. They were still subject to the whims of their male relatives and the societal expectations of the time. This duality invites us to reflect. While Viking women enjoyed certain freedoms, were they genuinely empowered, or did they still navigate a patriarchal structure? Let's not forget the historical implications of these dynamics. Eric's reliance on violence and intimidation may have alienated potential allies, yet the women in his life had the potential to foster unity through diplomacy and negotiation. Their voices could have changed the course of Viking history, but their narratives are often lost in the annals of time. This calls into question the very way history is recorded. Whose stories do we choose to tell, and how do those choices shape our understanding of the past? In exploring the lives of women during Eric Bloodaxe's reign, we uncover a rich tapestry of influence and resilience. They were not just passive participants in a male-dominated society. They were active contributors, shaping the political landscape and influencing decisions that affected their communities. This understanding enriches our view of Viking society, revealing it to be far more complex and dynamic than commonly portrayed. So, as we examine the role of women during Eric's rule, it's essential to recognize their contributions and challenge the narratives that have often relegated them to the sidelines. What lessons can we draw from their experiences? How does this inform our understanding of gender roles and leadership today? By recognizing the significance of Viking women, we not only celebrate their legacy but also open the door to deeper discussions about the roles of women throughout history and their ongoing impact in modern society. Eric Bloodaxe is a name that evokes images of fierce battles and ruthless ambition, but beneath the surface of his infamous reputation lies a complex legacy that intertwines with the lives of those around him, particularly the women who played pivotal roles during his reign. While many see Viking culture as solely patriarchal and warrior-centric, the reality is that women significantly influenced the political and social landscape of the time. What role did they actually play, and how did their contributions shape the narrative of Viking society? Most people think that Viking women were relegated to domestic roles, but the truth is quite different. They held positions of power and influence that were remarkable for their time. Eric's wives, daughters, and even female relatives often engaged in political affairs, acting as negotiators and mediators in conflicts that arose during his turbulent reign. For instance, did you know that women could inherit property and initiate divorce in Viking society? This legal framework allowed them to take significant steps toward autonomy, which is a testament to their strength and influence. The fascinating aspect of this is that while Eric sought to dominate through fear and violence, the women around him often used diplomacy and social connections to foster alliances. This raises an intriguing question. How could a ruler who relied on brutal tactics fail to recognize the strategic advantages that his wives and daughters could offer? Eric Bloodaxe's reign was characterized by constant conflict, yet the very women who shared his household had the potential to soften his approach and perhaps change the course of his rule. A strange but eye-opening fact is that Viking women sometimes led raids themselves. This isn't just a romantic notion. There are documented accounts of women fighting alongside men in battle. Imagine the surprise of their enemies when they faced fierce female warriors. This defiance of traditional gender roles adds a rich layer to our understanding of Viking society, where women were not merely passive figures but active participants in shaping their culture. Some historians argue that the glorification of Viking women as warriors oversimplifies their lived experiences. While they did enjoy more rights than women in many contemporary societies, their power was often contingent upon their male relatives and societal expectations. This raises a thought-provoking point. Were Viking women genuinely empowered, or did they still navigate a patriarchal structure that ultimately limited their autonomy? As we delve into Eric's life, we must consider how the roles of women impacted his leadership. His violent methods may have instilled fear, but the women in his family had the potential to build bridges and unify clans through negotiation. For instance, Eric's marriage alliances could have been used strategically to create lasting bonds with rival families. Ironically, while he sought to conquer through sheer force, it was these women who could have provided the subtlety and finesse that true leadership often requires. Additionally, the historical narrative surrounding Viking women has been shaped by the lens through which we view them. The sagas and stories we rely on today often focus on the male heroes of the time, neglecting the voices of the women who were just as instrumental in the Viking Age's complex tapestry. This invites us to ask, how many untold stories exist that could change our perception of history? In understanding the contributions of women during Eric Bloodaxe's reign, we uncover a wealth of influence and resilience. They were not just figures in the background, they were active agents shaping the political landscape of their time. This insight not only enriches our view of Viking culture, but also encourages us to reflect on the broader implications of gender dynamics and leadership throughout history. As we explore this fascinating intersection of gender and power, we begin to see that the legacy of Eric Bloodaxe is not solely defined by his actions, but also by the impactful roles women play during his rule. What can we learn from their stories? How can these insights inform our understanding of leadership and gender equality today? By acknowledging the significance of Viking women, we not only celebrate their contributions but also open the door to deeper discussions about the roles of women throughout history and their continuing influence in modern society. The downfall of Eric Bloodaxe is not just a story of a king who fell from grace. It is a cautionary tale that offers profound lessons for leaders today. While many view leadership as a path to power, Eric's reign exemplifies the dire consequences of tyranny and violence. What led to his ultimate demise? How did the very tactics he employed to seize control become the reasons for his undoing? The truth is, Eric faced relentless rebellion from his own people. The iron grip he held over his subjects created an atmosphere of fear, which, instead of fostering loyalty, bred resentment and distrust. This is a critical point. While fear can maintain order temporarily, it seldom cultivates genuine allegiance. A striking fact to consider is that in many cases throughout history, leaders who ruled through intimidation ultimately faced the very rebellions they sought to suppress. Eric's story is no exception. His violent methods alienated potential allies and created a breeding ground for insurrection. For one, the constant warfare under Eric's rule disrupted everyday life. Viking society was already fraught with challenges, and Eric's aggressive tactics escalated these tensions. As trade routes became perilous and agricultural pursuits were interrupted, the common folk began to suffer greatly. It's a little-known fact that in 10th century Norway, the economy heavily relied on a network of trade that spanned across the seas. Disruption to these trade routes would have a cascading effect on food supplies and commerce, leading to widespread discontent. In addition to economic hardships, the cultural identity of the Vikings was also at stake. A society built on values of loyalty and bravery found itself in turmoil. Eric's approach undermined these principles, causing divisions among clans that once stood united. The consequences were dire. People were forced to choose between their allegiance to their king and their ties to their kin. This is a controversial point. Some may argue that the Vikings were inherently violent, but the reality is that their culture also valued cooperation and trust, values that Eric's reign compromised. Ultimately, Eric's violent methods led to his expulsion from Norway. He died in battle, a grim end that serves as a stark reminder of the perils of tyranny. His fall from power is not just a historical footnote. It holds relevant lessons for modern leadership. Leaders today must recognize that authority is not synonymous with respect. Eric's legacy underscores the need for accountability and ethical governance. In an age where information travels faster than ever, the fear of exposure and backlash can quickly turn the tide against oppressive regimes. As we reflect on Eric Bloodaxe's downfall, we must ask ourselves, what lessons can modern leaders glean from this story? It emphasizes the importance of building bridges instead of walls, nurturing loyalty through respect rather than fear, and understanding that leadership is as much about serving the people as it is about wielding power. The downfall of Eric Bloodaxe is not merely a historical event. It is a universal tale that transcends time and culture, offering timeless wisdom for all who aspire to lead. The Viking Age was not just a time of raiding and conquest. It was an era that gave rise to complex social structures, intricate belief systems, and vibrant cultural exchanges. At the heart of this fascinating period lies the figure of Eric Bloodaxe, whose reign is a critical lens through which we can examine the intricate fabric of Viking society. To understand Viking society during Eric's time, we must first consider its hierarchical structure. Contrary to popular belief that all Vikings were ruthless warriors, society was deeply stratified. The nobility, composed of powerful chieftains and kings, held significant sway over land and resources. Yet the role of the common folk, farmers, craftsmen, and laborers, was equally vital to the Viking economy and social order. A surprising fact that often goes unnoticed is that many Vikings were primarily farmers and traders rather than warriors. This raises an important question. How did this social structure shape the values and behaviors of the people? Loyalty and bravery were revered qualities among the Vikings, deeply ingrained in their cultural ethos. However, Eric's violent tactics and tyranny severely undermined these core values. Rather than fostering loyalty through respect, he instilled fear through brutality. This approach not only alienated potential allies, but also instigated infighting among clans. Imagine a society where the very fabric of trust is torn apart by the actions of its leader. This was the reality for the Vikings under Eric's rule. Furthermore, Viking society was deeply interconnected with its belief systems. The Vikings were polytheistic, worshipping a pantheon of gods who represented various aspects of life and nature. They believed that their fates were intertwined with the whims of these deities, leading to a culture rich in ritual and superstition. This is where it gets intriguing. Eric Bloodaxe's reliance on violent acts to curry favor with the gods demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of his society's core values. The irony? Many of his subjects likely viewed such violence as an affront to the very gods they revered. This brings us to a controversial point. While Eric's actions were aimed at consolidating power, they actually served to fracture the unity within Viking society. His reign exemplified how leadership rooted in fear can lead to division rather than cohesion. The historical implications are profound. Leaders today must learn that fostering genuine allegiance comes from building relationships, not instilling fear. As we delve deeper into to Eric's legacy, we must consider the question of honor. Viking culture placed immense importance on honor and reputation. A leader was expected to embody these qualities, inspiring his followers to act with bravery and loyalty. Eric, however, subverted these expectations by prioritizing violence and intimidation over honor. This conflict between expected values and actual behavior presents a fascinating case study on how societal values can be distorted by those in power. In summary, the historical context of Viking society during Eric Bloodaxe's reign reveals a complex tapestry of relationships, beliefs, and values. Understanding this context sheds light on Eric's failures as a leader and emphasizes the importance of ethical governance. By examining the societal structure and cultural values of the Vikings, we can glean insights that resonate beyond history, reminding us of the timeless principles of leadership, honor, and community. Eric's story serves as a poignant reminder that the foundations of leadership lie not in power alone, but in the values that leaders choose to uphold. Many lives were impacted by Eric Bloodaxe's reign, but the stories of those affected are often overshadowed by his infamous legend. These were not just numbers or mere footnotes in history. They were individuals with dreams, families, and aspirations, all caught in the crossfire of a ruler whose thirst for power left a trail of devastation. One of the most shocking truths is that Eric's violent policies led to countless innocent casualties. Imagine living in a time where your safety hinges on the whims of a tyrant. There are countless accounts of villagers whose only crime was to live in proximity to rival factions, being slaughtered or forced into servitude. This brings up an uncomfortable truth. Violence often begets more violence, and Eric's reign exemplified this cycle. With every brutal act, he not only alienated potential allies, but also deepened the wounds within his own community. In Viking society, tales of heroism and bravery were woven into the fabric of daily life. Yet for many, Eric's rule meant living in constant fear, where loyalty to a chieftain could cost one their life. It's a stark contrast to the popular notion of Vikings as fearless warriors. Many were merely trying to survive amidst the chaos. An astonishing fact you may not know is that many Vikings chose to abandon their homelands, seeking refuge elsewhere, illustrating the dire straits in which Eric's subjects found themselves. As we dive deeper into the narratives of Eric's victims, we see that their stories highlight a critical aspect of leadership: the responsibility to protect and uplift those you govern. Instead of fostering a community built on trust and mutual respect, Eric's reign was characterized by division and fear. The loyalty of his followers was not a result of admiration, but rather a product of intimidation. This raises an essential question: how do we ensure that leadership is about service and protection rather than oppression? Many of Eric's victims were not only common folk, but also members of rival clans who sought peace. Their aspirations for harmony were crushed under the weight of Eric's ambition. These are stories of families torn apart, of individuals who once shared the same cultural bonds, now fractured by violence. They are stories that remind us that history is not merely a collection of events. It's the sum of individual experiences, and it's imperative to give voice to those who suffered in silence. In addition, the broader historical context reveals a harsh truth about the nature of power. It can corrupt, and it often does. Eric's heavy-handed approach led to an environment of distrust, where alliances were formed out of fear rather than respect. This is a powerful reminder that true leadership is about inspiring loyalty through shared values and mutual benefit. Yet Eric's actions set a dangerous precedent, one that may resonate with leaders even today. A controversial aspect of Eric's legacy is that, while he is often remembered for his ruthlessness, he was also a product of his time. Many Viking leaders relied on similar tactics, believing that strength and fear were the best means of governance. But this leads to a troubling reality. Such leadership styles are often romanticized in history. What can we learn from the stories of those who lived under Eric's rule? They teach us that empathy and compassion are not weaknesses. Rather, they are the hallmarks of effective leadership. As we explore these narratives, we uncover the importance of storytelling in history. The accounts of Eric's victims offer a different perspective, one that humanizes the often glamorized image of Viking life. It forces us to confront the darker aspects of our heroes and to recognize that history is nuanced, filled with complex characters and situations. These stories remind us to listen to the voices that have been marginalized and to understand that every historical figure has a deeper context. Highlighting the struggles of Eric's victims, we not only honor their memories, but also gain insight into the potential consequences of unchecked power. The personal and communal tragedies that resulted from Eric's rule serve as cautionary tales for future leaders. They prompt us to reflect on the ethical implications of our decisions and the need for accountability and leadership. In conclusion, the stories of Eric Bloodaxe's victims serve as a poignant reminder that every ruler's legacy is not merely defined by their actions, but also by the lives they touch. Eric's reign teaches us valuable lessons about the weight of leadership and the importance of prioritizing the well-being of those we govern. As we navigate our own paths, let us carry these lessons forward, ensuring that history serves as a guide rather than a warning. By giving voice to the voiceless, we foster a richer understanding of our past, paving the way for a more empathetic future. Eric Bloodaxe's legacy is not just one of fear and violence. It also significantly influenced modern culture, shaping our understanding of Viking history history in ways that often blur the lines between fact and fiction. One might wonder, how has a ruler from the 10th century continued to resonate through the ages? For starters, Eric Bloodaxe has been a character in various films, books, and television shows, often portrayed as the quintessential Viking warrior. However, many of these representations lean heavily on dramatization, which can distort the historical realities of his reigns. A fascinating point to consider is that while Eric is often depicted as a fierce and formidable leader, the actual stories of his rule paint a much more complex picture, one filled with conflict and failed ambitions. Many people might believe that Viking life was gloriously adventurous and romantic, but the reality was quite different. The Viking Age was characterized by brutal warfare, societal divisions, and constant power struggles. In portraying Eric, modern media frequently romanticizes these harsh realities, transforming him into a heroic figure rather than the tyrant that history often suggests. This contrast raises an important question. How do these portrayals affect our understanding of Viking culture? One rare fact that may surprise you is that, despite Eric's brutal tactics, his rule is sometimes romanticized in Viking sagas, which often glorify warriors and their exploits. This has led to a cultural legacy that, while fascinating, can misrepresent the impact of violence on society. Instead of fostering unity or respect, Eric's reign was marked by treachery and fear, creating a legacy that serves as a cautionary tale rather than a model for emulation. As we examine the various adaptations of Eric Bloodaxe's character in popular culture, it's essential to consider what these portrayals tell us about our own society. There is often a tendency to glorify violent leaders, which can lead to a misunderstanding of the true nature of power and leadership. This tendency is controversial. Some argue that it diminishes the suffering experienced by those who lived under tyrannical regimes. So what do we take away from this? One major insight is that understanding historical figures like Eric Bloodaxe requires us to separate legend from reality. His portrayal in modern culture often neglects the real consequences of his reign, leading to an oversimplified narrative that may be appealing but is ultimately misleading. It raises an important conversation about how we engage with history. Are we honoring the past, or are we perpetuating myths that obscure its darker truths? A particularly strange fact in this discussion is how the Viking image has been commodified in modern media. From cartoonish depictions of Vikings with horned helmets to Viking-themed festivals celebrating their supposed bravery and camaraderie. Yet in doing so, we may overlook the authentic cultural and historical context, which was rife with conflict and harsh realities of survival. This brings us to the implications of historical representation in media. Eric Bloodaxe, while a fascinating character, also symbolizes the need for critical engagement with our historical narratives. As we continue to learn from history, the portrayal of figures like Eric can serve as both a warning and an opportunity for reflection on how we view leadership, power, and the consequences of violence in our society. In conclusion, Eric Bloodaxe's influence on modern culture is profound and complex. He serves as a reminder that history is not merely a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the stories of many individuals, both the powerful and the powerless. As we navigate our understanding of the past, let us strive to honor the truth, giving voice to those who lived through the trials of tyranny and celebrating the resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression. By doing so, we can cultivate a more nuanced understanding of our history, learning valuable lessons that resonate in today's world. Eric Bloodaxe is often portrayed in the annals of history as a ruthless ruler whose reign left behind a complex legacy. But what about the stories of those who lived under his rule? The tales of Eric's victims, often overshadowed by his own notorious reputation, reveal a darker side of his leadership and the far-reaching impact of his violent policies. You might think that leaders like Eric are remembered primarily for their conquests and achievements, but the reality is that the consequences of their actions ripple through history, affecting countless lives. Consider this: while Eric's name echoes through time as a symbol of Viking might, the stories of the families torn apart by his decisions are seldom told. Many innocent lives were lost due to his brutal policies, with communities suffering greatly under the weight of fear and oppression. These narratives challenge the glorified image of the Viking warrior, inviting us to explore the human cost of Eric's ambition. So, who were these individuals, and what can their stories teach us about the nature of power and leadership? The first intriguing aspect of these narratives is that they remind us of the vulnerability of ordinary people in the face of tyranny. For instance, imagine a small village that once thrived on trade and cooperation, suddenly thrust into chaos as Eric's armies swept through, demanding tribute and instilling fear. Families who had lived in harmony were forced to make unimaginable choices, and many found themselves at odds with their neighbors, all in a desperate attempt to survive. This reflects a shocking truth. Tyrants not only disrupt societal structures but also dismantle the very fabric of community life. Another lesser-known fact is that many of Eric's victims were not merely nameless faces in the crowd. They were skilled artisans, farmers, and warriors in their own right. This challenges the common narrative that depicts Viking society as simply brutal and warlike. Instead, we see a complex community with diverse roles and contributions. The loss of these individuals due to Eric's relentless pursuit of power is a tragic footnote in history, often overshadowed by the grand tales of conquest conquest. As we delve deeper, it's essential to recognize the impact of Eric's policies on the societal values of the time. The constant state of warfare and fear led to a culture of distrust. Rather than fostering loyalty and bravery, Eric's reign cultivated suspicion among clans and families. This shift in values is a striking illustration of how a leader's actions can directly influence the moral landscape of a society. It raises a profound question. How do leaders shape the values of their communities, and at what cost? One controversial perspective is that while Eric Bloodaxe is often romanticized as a heroic figure in popular culture, the reality of his reign serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of power unchecked by morality. This stark contrast invites us to reflect on the implications of glorifying leaders who rule through fear and violence. Is it right to celebrate such figures, or should we instead focus on the stories of those who suffered under their rule? To give a voice to the victims of Eric's reign, we can look to the historical records that mention individuals who opposed him. Some brave souls took a stand against his tyranny, rallying others to resist his demands. These stories of resilience are just as important as the tales of conquest, illustrating the human spirit's capacity for defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The bravery of those who stood up to Eric challenges the narrative of his invincibility, reminding us that courage often resides in unexpected places. The impact of Eric Bloodaxe's brutal rule was not merely a historical footnote. It shaped the legacy of Viking society in profound ways. Communities fractured, trust eroded, and the very identity of the Viking people was put to the test. Lessons learned from the stories of his victims provide valuable insights into the consequences of tyranny and the importance of ethical leadership. In a world where power can easily corrupt, reflecting on these narratives allows us to seek more compassionate forms of governance that prioritize the well-being of all. In summary, the stories of Eric Bloodaxe's victims are crucial in understanding the true impact of his rule. They remind us that history is not solely about great leaders, but also about the lives they affect. As we reflect on these narratives, we are called to consider the implications of our own leadership in today's world. The cost of tyranny is far too high, and it is through the lessons of the past that we can strive for a more just and humane future. The voices of the overlooked deserve to be heard, and by honoring their stories, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of what it truly means to lead with integrity and compassion. The story of Eric Bloodaxe, a figure often celebrated for his Viking prowess, reveals a complex tapestry of power, fear, and the human experience under tyranny. While many see him as a legendary warrior, the reality of his reign paints a stark picture of suffering for countless individuals. These stories of Eric's victims, often overshadowed by his own fierce reputation, provide invaluable insights into the consequences of ruthless leadership. Imagine living in a village thriving on cooperation, where trade and community bonds flourished. Suddenly, this idyllic existence is shattered as Eric's forces descend, demanding tribute and loyalty under the threat of violence. Many families face dire choices, torn between survival and resistance. This reveals a profound truth about tyranny. It not only disrupts societal harmony, but also erodes the very fabric of community life. Among the tales of Eric's victims are those of skilled artisans, farmers, and local leaders who opposed his rule. These individuals had lives, dreams, and contributions that were abruptly extinguished by Eric's unyielding ambition. The loss of their talents and potential raises critical questions about the cost of power and the sacrifices made by those who stood in the way of a tyrant. While Eric may be remembered for his conquests, these stories remind us that true strength lies in community, cooperation, and resilience. But the impact of Eric's rule extended beyond personal loss. It fundamentally altered the societal values of the Viking Age. Under Eric's reign, the ideals of loyalty and bravery were twisted into a culture of fear and mistrust. Rather than fostering a sense of unity among clans, his leadership style incited division and suspicion. This shift invites us to consider the broader implications of leadership on societal norms and the responsibilities that come with power. Controversially, while Eric Bloodaxe is often romanticized in modern portrayals of Viking culture, his legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of glorifying leaders who govern through fear. This disparity between myth and reality challenges us to critically evaluate whom we choose to celebrate in our historical narratives. Are we honoring the fallen victims, or merely glorifying the aggressors? As we honor the stories of those who suffered under Eric's rule, we can also spotlight those who dared to resist. Some brave individuals rallied their communities to oppose his tyranny, standing up against oppression despite the overwhelming odds. These stories of defiance serve as powerful reminders that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can rise to challenge injustice. The effects of Eric Bloodaxe's brutal leadership left scars on Viking society that lasted long after his reign ended. Communities splintered, trust was eroded, and the very identity of the Viking people came under scrutiny. The narratives of Eric's victims, therefore, are not just historical accounts. They are essential lessons about the consequences of unchecked power. They urge us to reflect on our own governance today, reminding us that the pursuit of power must always be balanced by a commitment to justice and humanity. In summary, the stories of Eric Bloodaxe's victims are crucial for understanding the true impact of his rule. They challenge the glorified image of the Viking warrior and remind us that history is shaped by both great leaders and those who suffer under their decisions. By reflecting on these narratives, we are prompted to reconsider our values and the nature of leadership in our own lives. As we honor the lives lost and the communities disrupted, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of what it means to lead with integrity, compassion, and responsibility. In the grand tapestry of history, Eric Bloodaxe stands as a vivid reminder of how the actions of one leader can reverberate through time, shaping not just the lives of those around him, but also the legacy of an entire culture. But how does his story compare to that of other notorious figures throughout history? Most people think of Eric as a quintessential Viking, a brutal conqueror who ruled through fear and violence. However, the reality is much more complex. When we compare Eric Bloodaxe to other tyrants like Caligula or Ivan the Terrible, we begin to see patterns in leadership that transcend time and geography. Like Eric, Caligula was known for his cruelty and excesses. He famously declared himself a god and engaged in acts of debauchery that shocked even his supporters. Yet, Caligula's reign was short-lived. He was assassinated by his own guards after just 4 years. Similarly, Ivan the Terrible ruled with an iron fist, creating a climate of fear that led to widespread paranoia. His own son fell victim to his violent outbursts, showcasing the dangers of unchecked power even within one's own family. So, what lessons can we extract from these comparisons? First, we can see that tyrannical leaders often cultivate a culture of fear that may secure their power temporarily, but ultimately sows the seeds of their own destruction. Eric, much like Caligula and Ivan, relied on brutality to suppress dissent. His use of mercenaries and ruthless tactics alienated potential allies, leading to isolation and rebellion. This reflects a fundamental truth about leadership. Tyranny can never establish a sustainable foundation. Moreover, examining the fates of these leaders invites us to consider the nature of power itself. Many who ascend through fear often fall victim to the very tactics they employ. Eric was expelled from Norway and died in battle, a testament to the fact that power built on fear is inherently unstable. This raises the question, how do we ensure that today's leaders do not repeat these historical mistakes? Interestingly, the very act of comparing these figures reveals patterns in human behavior that remain relevant today. Tyranny breeds resentment, and a leadership style centered on intimidation can foster an environment where trust is scarce. As we reflect on the stories of Eric Bloodaxe, Caligula, and Ivan the Terrible, we must ask ourselves how we can cultivate leaders who prioritize responsibility, integrity, and the well-being of their people. But here's the twist. Historical narratives often glorify these figures as larger-than-life warriors or cunning strategists. Yet when we dig deeper, we uncover the human cost of their actions. The stories of those who suffered under their reigns remind us that history is not just about great leaders, it's also about the communities affected by their decisions. Consider this. What if we shifted our focus from the tyrants to their victim? By examining the stories of those oppressed by Eric's rule, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of the era. This approach encourages empathy and highlights the importance of resistance, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Conclusion: by comparing Eric Bloodaxe with other historical tyrants, we glean vital lessons about power, leadership, and the human experience. The legacy of Eric, much like those of Caligula and Ivan the Terrible, serves as a cautionary tale, one that urges us to reflect on our own leadership choices today. How can we ensure that we build communities based on trust and respect rather than fear? These questions are not merely academic, they are essential for shaping the future we desire. As we move forward, let's strive to create a narrative that honors the voices of the many rather than glorifying the few. In examining Eric Bloodaxe's rule, we uncover a multitude of lessons about leadership, power, and the consequences of tyranny. What can we learn from Eric's mistakes, and how might these lessons apply to our own lives today? Most people think that strength and brutality are the keys to leadership. However, the reality is that such an approach often leads to chaos and downfall. Eric Bloodaxe's reign, marked by violence and fear, teaches us that true leadership requires more than just the ability to wield power. It demands responsibility, empathy, and a commitment to the well-being of the community. Eric ruled through fear, believing that his might would ensure loyalty. This led to a culture where dissent was crushed, but it also fostered deep-seated resentment among his people. Many began to see him as a tyrant rather than a leader, ultimately leading to his expulsion from Norway and his demise in battle. The lesson here is clear. Leadership built on fear is inherently unstable. Reflecting on Eric's actions allows us to explore the modern implications of leadership styles. How often do we see leaders today who rely on intimidation or aggression? The fallout from such tactics can be catastrophic, not just for those in power but also for the communities they lead. Eric's example prompts us to think critically about what qualities we value in our leaders. Moreover, Eric's reliance on mercenaries and ruthless warriors reveals another critical lesson. While he believed he could buy loyalty through brute force, this strategy ultimately backfired. True loyalty and respect cannot be purchased. They must be earned through integrity and shared values. As we consider this in our own contexts, we must ask ourselves, how can we cultivate an environment of trust rather than fear? The tragic end of Eric Bloodaxe serves as a poignant reminder that the pursuit of power at the expense of others leads to isolation and chaos. History has shown us time and again that tyrants, no matter how strong they seem, eventually fall. Their Their legacies are often marked not by greatness but by suffering and destruction. As we delve deeper into the lessons from Eric's reign, we are encouraged to reflect on our actions and the impact they have on those around us. Are we fostering environments that promote collaboration, trust, and responsibility, or are we contributing to a culture of fear and division? In conclusion, the tale of Eric Bloodaxe is not just a historical account. It is a powerful narrative filled with timeless lessons about leadership and its ramifications. By embracing these insights, we can aspire to be better leaders, ones who prioritize empathy, responsibility, and the greater good over the fleeting allure of power. What will you choose to do differently in your leadership journey? The narrative of Eric Bloodaxe serves as a significant case study in contemporary discussions about leadership, authority, and ethical governance. Many might assume that power is best maintained through intimidation and fear. Yet Eric's story reveals a profound truth. Such tactics often lead to downfall and despair. Eric's reign is often cited as a classic example of how tyrannical leadership breeds dissent. In today's world, this resonates deeply. We see numerous leaders who adopt similar strategies, believing that fear will ensure compliance and loyalty. However, history shows us that this is a flawed approach. The fear instilled by leaders like Eric eventually breeds rebellion and resentment, leading to instability and chaos. How can we, as a society, recognize and challenge these patterns? A notable aspect of Eric's rule is the isolation he faced due to his aggressive tactics. While other leaders sought alliances and fostered relationships, Eric chose to instigate conflict. This decision left him vulnerable, demonstrating the importance of collaboration and community in effective leadership. Modern discussions about power ethics often highlight the value of teamwork, communication, and trust, principles that Eric Bloodaxe sorely lacked. Moreover, Eric's legacy forces us to question the accountability of leaders. In contemporary times, when leaders act without regard for the consequences of their actions, the results can be devastating. Eric's example serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. How can we ensure that our leaders are held accountable? What mechanisms do we need to put in place to foster responsible governance? As we delve into the implications of Eric Bloodaxe's rule, we must also consider the complexities of human behavior and leadership. Why do some leaders resort to fear tactics while others strive for unity and collaboration? Understanding the psychological underpinnings of these choices can illuminate our perspectives on current leadership dynamics. In summary, the lessons derived from Eric Bloodaxe's tumultuous reign are as relevant today as they were in the 10th century. Leadership grounded in fear may yield short-term compliance, but ultimately erodes trust and invites chaos. By reflecting on Eric's mistakes, we can foster discussions about ethical leadership and promote a more responsible approach to governance in our modern society. How will you apply these insights to your own experiences with leadership? Viking culture is often seen through a narrow lens of violence and conquest, yet it was so much more than that. Did you know that Viking societies were not just warriors, but also skilled traders, craftsmen, and explorers? Their culture encompassed a rich tapestry of art, music, and storytelling that has profoundly influenced the modern world. But what about their approach to ethics and community? How did these values shape their interactions and legacy? As we dive into the essence of Viking culture beyond Eric Bloodaxe, we can uncover the nuances that reveal a more holistic understanding of this fascinating civilization. Most people think of Vikings as mere raiders, yet the reality is that they had a complex social structure and a deep appreciation for their traditions and beliefs. They crafted intricate jewelry, composed sagas that preserved their history, and engaged in trade that extended far beyond the Scandinavian peninsula. One peculiar aspect of Viking life was their communal gatherings known as Thing, where free men would come together to discuss matters of law, justice, and community decisions. This practice of communal decision-making highlights the importance of collective governance in their society. It was not solely about who wielded the sword, but about who could articulate their vision for the future. While many leaders today may still prioritize power over community, the Vikings understood that strong relationships fostered resilience. They faced numerous challenges, from rival tribes to harsh weather, yet they thrived through cooperation and collaboration. This leads us to an important question. How can modern societies learn from the Viking approach to community building? Exploring Viking art and literature also provides insight into their values. Their sagas often depicted themes of honor, loyalty, and the struggle against fate. These narratives were not just entertainment. They served as moral compasses for the society. Much like how we use storytelling today to convey important lessons, Vikings harnessed their narratives to instill values and guide behavior. A controversial point to consider is that Viking culture was not uniformly peaceful. They had their share of conflicts and ethical dilemmas. However, it is essential to recognize the duality of their nature, the ability to be both fierce warriors and community-minded individuals. This complexity is often lost in simplified portrayals of Viking history. One rare fact about Viking society is that they practiced a form of democracy, albeit limited to free men. This practice allows us to reflect on how inclusive governance can impact the strength and cohesion of a community. Could it be that some of the struggles in modern governance stem from neglecting these foundational principles of cooperation and shared responsibility? In summary, understanding Viking culture beyond the infamous figure of Eric Bloodaxe reveals a rich and complex society marked by artistry, communal governance, and a deep respect for for traditions. Nice. This exploration prompts us to reconsider our own values in leadership and community. How can we integrate these lessons into our lives today to foster a more inclusive and ethical society? As we move forward, let us remember that history is not just about the past. It is a guide for our present and future actions. Viking culture is often misunderstood, seen primarily through the lens of their conquests and battles. Yet there's so much more beneath the surface of this fascinating civilization. Did you know that the Vikings were not just brutal raiders, but also skilled craftsmen, traders, and explorers who contributed significantly to the cultural and economic fabric of Europe? They established trade routes that spanned from North America to Asia, demonstrating their ingenuity and adaptability. As we delve into understanding Viking culture beyond the notorious Eric Bloodaxe, we find a society rich in art, storytelling, and community values. Most people think of Vikings as simply warriors, but the reality is that they had a complex social structure with traditions that fostered cooperation and mutual respect. This opens a broader discussion about how their values shaped not only their lives, but also their interactions with others. One intriguing aspect of Viking life was their Thing, an assembly where free men gathered to discuss laws and community issues. These gatherings were pivotal in Viking society, illustrating their commitment to shared governance. While many leaders today may prioritize individual power, the Vikings recognized the strength found in collective decision-making. This raises an essential question: what can modern societies learn from the Viking approach to community governance? A richness of Viking culture is further revealed through their art and literature. The sagas, which tell the tales of their heroes and gods, were not merely for entertainment. They served as moral guides, reflecting the values of honor, loyalty, and bravery. Just as we use narratives today to impart lessons, the Vikings harnessed storytelling to shape their social fabric. However, it's important to acknowledge that Viking culture was not without its contradictions. They espoused values of honor and loyalty. They also engaged in violent conflicts that sometimes undermined these very principles. This duality complicates our understanding and calls for a nuanced view of their civilization. One lesser-known fact about Viking society is that they practiced a form of democracy, albeit limited to free men. This practice highlights the potential impact of inclusive governance on community strength. Could it be that some of the challenges faced in contemporary societies stem from a disregard for these foundational principles? Exploring Viking culture also invites us to reflect on the roles of women, who often held significant power and influence in their community. Contrary to many historical narratives that overlook female contributions, Viking women played critical roles in both domestic and public spheres. This raises questions about gender dynamics and how we can better appreciate the contributions of women throughout history. In summary, examining Viking culture beyond Eric Bloodaxe reveals a complex society characterized by artistry, governance, and a deep-rooted sense of community. This exploration prompts us to reconsider our own values in leadership and community building. How can we integrate these lessons into our lives today to foster more inclusive and ethical societies? As we continue this journey, remember that history is not just a recount of past events. It is a guide for our future actions and decisions. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.